Unanimous consent.
Well, I apologize. Yeah, gentleman's recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a Republican staff report from the Committee on the Judiciary dated November 4th, 2022, entitled FBI Whistleblowers, What Their Disclosures Indicate, and ask that the committee also provide a copy to Mr. Goldman so that he might be able to review all the staff notes compiled in the report.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
I thank the chairman. Dr. Turley, let me just go back, or Mr. Turley, let me just go back. How many times have you testified before Congress on behalf of all of us? Dozens and dozens and dozens over my 22 years.
I've testified both as a Republican and Democrat witness over 50 times, approaching 60.
So, to use a term of art, you're an expert witness when it comes to evaluating the Constitution and a great many laws and their interpretation.
That's how I've been called. That's why I've been called to this.
And you teach in that role.
I do.
Okay. And I want to thank you because in my 22 years, I have seen you representing both sides many times and normally treated with the respect that your opinions based on your readings or your scholarly work are generally respected by both sides of the aisle, and I thank you for that. You know, this committee is rightfully being talked about, subcommittee, about as weaponization of government, but I just want to clear up a couple of points. The previous operation known as Operation Choke Point, where government limited people's ability actually to have bank accounts, that would be weaponization by government, a decision by government to affect commerce, correct?
Well, it certainly affects commerce. There's no question about that.
Okay, and it's outside what one would think the administrative state has a right to do in any sense. Our liberties include that right to have commerce not impinged by, based on our political views by our government. So, in a sense, the weaponization of DOJ isn't new, is it? It predates this administration and even the previous one.
No, that's true. Some of the darkest chapters in our history have come from the Department of Justice losing that independence and objective element that they pride themselves on. And that goes back to the Palmer raids and even before then. And whenever the DOJ and the FBI has lost its way in that sense, it has come at a great cost to the country as well as the department.
Well, and speaking of lost their way, back in 2010, 2012, with the IRS's targeting of conservative groups headed by Lois Lerner, that certainly limited the free speech of those organizations when they were denied their ability to hold themselves as not-for-profits, correct?
That had serious free speech implications.
So when we look at the weaponization of government, we should not limit it to three-letter words over at DOJ, but in fact, we need to look at government broadly and how it might impinge free speech or our rights to simply have our liberties. And to that extent, we've covered a lot of the FBI, and I think that's important, and I'm mentioning the IRS, but behind there, I have a concern about the FBI, Ms. Parker, I've got to go to you. Is that something that you think represents the neutralism of simply being law enforcement for the FBI basically to kneel in support of Black Lives Matter?
That would not be deemed appropriate. They're wearing their official FBI ballistic vests, and although, like we've mentioned, FBI agents, I have the right to my First Amendment thoughts, but I am not at the liberty to express any of my political or social opinions while on the job. I know that in that instance they were guarding our national institutions and that we heard that they were saying that they were trying to de-escalate the situation, but in those pictures it appears that there are people smiling, clapping. It looked very far from de-escalation to me, but it is not appropriate to make any sort of potentially political or social statement while wearing your FBI ballistic vest on official duty. No, it is not appropriate.
In the decades I served in the Army, we were warned about when in uniform being involved in anything that appeared to pick sides, and certainly they picked a side there. I want to just close my questioning because we're going to be doing this probably for 2 years, and ask a question again, Mr. Turley. We have this question of government and what it's doing, but a lot of people are talking about how Twitter's a private company, Facebook's a private company. They're all private companies. Isn't it fair to say that from a standpoint of statutory and constitutional history, our government has clearly looked at entities which convey free speech, newspapers, radio, television, and has limited the concentration of power and the concentration of ownership in order to maintain, although private, an ability for all, or at least most, free speech to find an avenue? Isn't that the history that we're also going to have to look at when it's concentrated in just a few companies?
It is, and the fact is that much of our political dialogue now takes a place on social media, which has replaced even telephones as a common form of communication. And that's why it is true that private companies can limit speech. But you have to keep in mind, these are communicative companies. These are closer to AT&T than they are Starbucks. And that raises a serious question in terms of not just looking at the government aspect of coordinating and targeting citizens for possible censorship, but the control of these companies over speech. And I think that people that sort of dismiss that are really losing the fact that this is now much of what is the marketplace of ideas. The marketplace of ideas is now a digital marketplace, and it's controlled by these companies.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.